So with that, Jason, you have the microphone.
All right, thank you, Roger. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, like Roger said, my name is Jason Keckler, and I retired from the Frederick Police Department in 2016 after serving 22 years. And I am now currently a Maryland Parole Commissioner. I was appointed by the current governor of the state of Maryland to a 6-year term on the Parole Commission. And in that job, I see every day many of the things that I saw when I was in Frederick, and that's what interested me in the position. I'm seeing a lot of struggles in not only our community, but across the state. And Roger already hit on it. There's a severe problem with substance abuse and mental health issues across this country, and it's definitely affecting our community. And so I see it in my current day-to-day, and then I also see it in the city of Frederick. So that is one area we're going to discuss today is I think we do have a behavioral health crisis that is affecting our community. But on the larger whole, when Roger talks about community policing, it's a term that's been around for decades. Roger approached me when he decided to run for mayor, and he asked me some advice. You know, what do you think about community policing, and maybe retooling it a little bit, and what he coined as the community policing 2.0. And he gave me a little bit about his vision. So I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to put together some thoughts, and I got back to Roger, and I think we're on the same page. I think we want the same things for Frederick. And so I told him that, yeah, I would help him out and provide some help with advice on public safety, and more specifically on the community policing role. Roger said it. I retired from the police department. I was actually a lieutenant. I had served 13 months as deputy chief of police, as a captain, an acting position. When I retired, I was the commander of the criminal investigation division, but I've worked in every department in the police department. And my background, my personal passion was always with the community policing side. And I have a lot of experience in that area. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Roger said it before, we have a wonderful police department. Everybody who's in Frederick is fortunate to have the police agency that they have. Everybody hears about all these national issues going on right now, but those national issues, by and large, have not affected our community, and they haven't affected our community for a reason, because of the personnel that they have. But police work, I can tell you, is a ever-changing business. And if you're not willing to change and you're not flexible, then you're going to get left behind and you're going to lose the community. So you really have to adapt to what the community needs are, but more importantly, you have to work with the community. And the communities that are struggling across this country are because they don't have a good relationship with the public. And in Frederick, fortunately, we have that. But to maintain that, Roger's vision for the future, I think, addresses the things that he can do and that he will bring to the city of Frederick. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Michelle, if you want to go to the first slide, what we have is a development of things that can be done within the first 100 days of a Roger Wilson campaign when it comes to public safety, more specifically community policing 2.0. These are things that from the police level, internal personnel can adapt these strategies and these needs. And it really wouldn't take a whole lot of staffing time and effort to do it. And this is something that the community should be a part of. One of the things I told Roger right from the beginning is my true belief, and I've served in the command position, so it is a political business when you have elected officials and they have department staff. The first thing I told Roger is you can't have a mayor that is dictating to a police chief or any other department head in the city, specifically on the ground things that they're supposed to be doing. So we're not going to talk about police tactics today. We're not going to talk about strategies on how to fight crime from a tactical standpoint. Those are things that are done within the police department. This is more about conceptually, how can the police department improve some strategies to, ideally, what you want to do is make the enforcement part of law enforcement the last thing that you do. So as I begin here today, we're going to talk about personnel first, but there's really 4 elements of policing all across this country. And I like to call them these 4. There's education, outreach, prevention, and enforcement. And I purposely, when I talk about this, I always put enforcement last, because if you do the education piece correctly, if you do the outreach piece correctly, if you do the prevention piece correctly, then enforcement ideally will be a last resort of anything that you have to do. So I know when there's a larger conversation about how policing has been done in this country and how, it hasn't been, there hasn't been a lot of equity in how police do their business. I think if you just follow that simple model of focusing on the education, the outreach, the prevention, ideally the enforcement will be left for the people that really need to be handled by the police in a manner of enforcement. But it starts with all the other things I talked about. So let's talk about personnel, hiring and retention. First of all, to have a successful police department, you have to hire the right people and you have to retain good people as well. Recruiting is a very difficult aspect of policing because just like the housing market is right now, there's only so many houses available and there's a lot of people that are looking for houses. Well, in this case, there's a lot of police agencies that are looking for recruits, but there's only so many recruits out there. So agencies are fighting for the same people. And when you're talking at a local level here in Frederick, you have Frederick County Sheriff's Office, you have the other municipal agencies in the county, you have the state police, and then you have federal law enforcement, and they're all trying to grab from the same pool. And here in today's society, it's no secret, the police have taken a lot of heat, and it makes it a very undesirable job where it was once a source of pride. And people who wanted to be police officers, they really want to make a difference in their community. And that really still exists today, but I think there's just been so much focus on a national level that my concern is that we're going to push away some very good, dedicated people who really have a passion for their community and want to be police officers here, but that may back away from a career choice in law enforcement because of those challenges. So how do you deal with that? Well, first of all, Roger touched on it. I mean, to be competitive, you do have to have good salary and benefits. I think the Frederick Police Department has excellent salary and benefits, but obviously, those areas are competitive. So the more competitive you can be there, that's important. But when I talk about recruiting and retention, aside from benefits and pay, I'm talking about what makes Frederick attractive for somebody who wants to be a police officer here. And Roger already hit on a lot of that. I mean, we have 74,000 people. I started in 1994. There were only about 40,000 residents in the city of Frederick. We've almost doubled the size now in less than 30 years. And it still maintains that small town charm. Everybody that lives here, I mean, you love to go to different parts of the city, in particular downtown, and you want to feel safe. Public safety stirs the pot for a city. If you don't feel safe in your community, then all the other aspects of city government don't really matter because you're going to lose your tax base because people aren't going to want to live there. People aren't going to want to go downtown and visit businesses or restaurants or other areas. So to recruit the proper personnel, I did an article for the International Association of Chiefs of Police for their Police Chief magazine several years ago. I went down to Alexandria, Virginia to their headquarters. And they wanted to come up with a way to send out a message to agencies across the country of what are we doing wrong in the recruitment area? How can we attract more candidates? And the first thing that I noted, and this was around 2008, 2009 period when the housing market had crashed and there were a lot of people flooded into the employment market that were looking for jobs. And the biggest thing that I noticed is in the past, especially when I started, you had two pools of candidates. You either had people that were former military, in particular military police, maybe half of our department, and then you had another half that maybe had criminal justice degrees and graduated from college in some respect. And that was pretty much it. I think we need to diversify our recruitment strategies. We have a diverse community, like Roger said. My goal would be to have as many people locally, not necessarily the city of Frederick, but people in Frederick County in this region that have been around Frederick, that live in the community, that really want to work here. And it doesn't matter what their background is, and it doesn't matter what age they are or what time they're starting. There were a lot of people we hired that maybe were working in the housing industry or doing real estate. And when that market crashed, they were looking for something to do. And we would go out and we talk to these people and say, hey, have you ever thought about law enforcement? And many people said, no, I don't have a degree in that. I never was in the military. And we try to get rid of that that mindset to really diversify our workforce and show the benefits of what it is. So you do have to have a passion for policing. It's not for everybody. So you can't just go around to just anybody and say, hey, you should be a police officer. But when you're out there on the beat, and we're going to talk about this more, one of Roger's biggest things is he wants people boots on the ground, walking, shaking hands, talking to people. Well, in a time when we can shake hands again, ideally that'll be sooner than later. But you really want to get out and talk to the people that you're protecting, because that's what you're doing. You want to be visible, and police officers are the first people that are seen. So one of the recruitment strategies is to get out and talk to people that maybe never considered roles in law enforcement before, and try to really explain to them that we're looking to hire a diverse, localized police agency where people really care about this community. I grew up in the city of Frederick, and the reason why I chose the city of Frederick as a police department is because I wanted to give back to the community that gave so much to me as a child growing up here. And I had opportunities in North Carolina where I was going to college and other places. And this is the only place that I applied to. I was fortunate, probably not the best strategy, but I was fortunate to get hired, and I worked a great career there. But you really want to dive into that pool for recruitment of localized candidates who really care about the community. And as far as retention, we're going to talk about this some more too a little bit later. But if you want to retain employees, obviously you have to have the salary and the benefits, but you have to have a good work environment for people to be there. You have to treat your personnel well from top to bottom, and you have to make sure that they're taken care of. We're talking about behavioral health issues. Police officers are human beings. These are the people that are in our community as well. They have families, they have struggles just like everybody else. Plus, they see the worst of the worst in society every single day. People don't call 911 and say, hey, can you send an officer over to my house? I just got a raise in my job. I got a promotion and things are wonderful, and I just wanted to tell a police officer about it. It's not how it works. Police officers are coming into the worst situations every single day in, day out, and it takes a toll. And there's vicarious trauma that is impacted on police officers that they carry that baggage with them. But as a police officer, you can't always show that emotion. You can't really talk to people about it, or at least that's always been the misbelief. And the truth of it is, if you have a really strong agency and you want to retain your employees, you'll talk to your employees, you'll recognize those things and understand that you need to take care of your personnel. Now, manpower needs and utilization. Are we using our staff to the best of our ability? I mean, one of the popular things going on nationwide is people are talking about defunding the police, and there's different ideas on what defunding the police means. Some people take the extreme view of abolish all police officers altogether. Obviously, I don't think that's a good strategy. But then other people describe defunding police as just distributing or redistributing resources and monies to areas that can be more effective. So under manpower needs and utilization, that's never a bad idea. We're constantly doing staffing studies in different areas, and the police department's done it over the years as well. One of the things that I think Roger can have done at the police level is having an internal staffing study done where we identify the duties that are currently taking place in the police department, and then making sure, are we allocating those resources in the best way? So if we have certain units that have a staffing capacity of 10, 15, 20 officers, but then we have other areas that are falling behind, can we redistribute those personnel to different areas to use them for maximum effectiveness? And it also helps as far as identifying monetarily where you want to put your budget dollars as well. And then again, I'm going to talk about it later when we talk about behavioral health. There's a lot of talk about reassigning police officers to different duties and maybe bringing in, I've heard social workers where they can come in and handle calls that police officers can handle. It sounds great in theory, but really the people that understand the job have to be involved in those discussions. And there are strategies that are currently in place that our police department uses right now, where we do use a cooperative team approach to responding to certain calls. But there's some different things that I'm going to talk about that maybe we haven't thought about that we can use to maximize those needs, and maybe use police officers more for the emergency policing needs, and then using other resources where you don't need them as much there. So let's talk about training. So there's basically 3 types of training that police officers do. You have the entry level training, that's for your incoming police officers in the academy. You have in-service training, which is ongoing training year round of police officers that have already been on the job. So in the Frederick Police Department, several times a year, we have training days, in-service training days, where you go back and we do different topics that we retrain on, or different topics that are new that we train our officers on. So our officers are constantly getting trained. They're mandated to participate in a certain number of hours by the state commission that regulates policing training. And our police officers probably do double or triple what is mandated. So that in-service is constantly ongoing, and it's a very important piece of keeping things fresh for the officers. So you're not just getting something one time, you're constantly training for maximum efficiency. And then personnel development. And this is the area where I talked to Roger, where I think the police department could really do a better job. I'll talk, you see there's introduce a purpose-driven policing model, but let's talk about leadership development. In the police department, one of the things that I noticed, at least throughout my career, is I was fortunate to get promoted to different ranks throughout the agency. And when you got promoted, there was a supervisor school that you went to. It started out where it wasn't even in-house. They would send you down to like Sykesville, and you do a 2-week leadership or supervisor training, but you really weren't learning and developing within your own agency. And so we did tweak some things over the years, and we started doing some internal supervisor training, sort of at the in-service level too. We started a supervisor in-service training, but there's really more we need to do. And I think one of the biggest areas where you see it right now is the police department's going through a chief search right now. They're down to 2 candidates. Everybody who's on here probably knows they're 2 external candidates. There are no internal candidates that currently work in the police department that were considered or made it to the end of this process. And I think that's unfortunate. I think we're losing out on our local talent that we have. And I can tell you, there's a lot of great young police officers, supervisors, and commanders in the Frederick Police Department that would make outstanding upper leaders, if not chiefs of police, someday in the police department. But I just don't think that there's a leadership development program in existence right now that is really mentoring these officers, then supervisors, to those leadership roles. And what you're doing is you're having police officers that you're spending the money on, the city of Frederick spending the money on, taxpayers are paying to train these officers, to develop these officers throughout their careers. They work 20, 22 years or more in the police department. And then we're telling them, okay, well, thank you for your service. And then they're moving on, and we're bringing in outside people to take over the leadership reins of the department, where you have all that internal knowledge that is leaving. And then what happens is when you have commanders that are at those highest levels who see that happening, and then they feel like, well, there's only so far I can go in the department. I'm never going to get the chief of police job. They're just going to do a national search, and they're going to find somebody from the outside. Well, there's really no incentive for me to stick around, so I'll leave. And there's several police commanders from the Frederick Police Department now that are serving in chief of police jobs and other executive type leadership positions in different parts of this county, in this country, that we've lost to outside candidates. That's not saying that they were all, and I was a chief candidate back before I left as well. That's not saying I would have been the best candidate for the job, but I don't think that the candidates were even getting consideration. And I think part of that is we could have done a better job with developing our leaders. So that's what I mean with that. Purpose-driven policing model. This is an idea that I came up with that I was trying to describe to Roger in just a short period of time. And I'm not going to be able to go through it all with you right now on this, but purpose-driven policing model is a concept that I came up with probably 8 years ago or more. And I did do a little piece at a supervisor in service where I put some of these concepts in there. But the idea behind a purpose-driven policing model is it's an ethics-based policing model where everything surrounds a law enforcement objective. So it takes away any thought of bringing your own personal opinions or your own biases and beliefs into a situation, because you're always focused on what is my law enforcement objective. And it's all based around ethics. And it starts from the time that you get a call, for instance, you're already thinking about, okay, what is my objective when I get to the scene, and how am I going to handle this situation, and using ethical principles to do it. Now we teach ethics. I taught ethics in the Frederick Police Department for 17 years. And we always did an entry level and an in-service ethics training. In the entry level, we did 4 hours in the beginning of the academy, and then we do 4 hours at the end. So police officers got 8 hours in ethics. The truth is, either you have ethics or you don't when you come into the job, and ideally you weed out the people that don't when they get there. But ethics, just like everything else, is constantly having to be trained. You have to constantly stay on top of the reasons why you're doing the job. And so the purpose-driven policing model is a way to change a culture within a police department. That's the idea behind it. I actually plan to write a book someday about it, and I would like to make it the model of policing across the country, to develop a culture of policing where everything is ethics-based and it's designed around specific law enforcement objectives. Again, there's more to it. We don't have time to go into it here, but it is something that I would like to see introduced locally in the Frederick Police Department. And there are some supervisors in the department, like I said, that had gotten a brief snippet of that during some training. And then the last one under personnel is residency initiative program. This is something that Roger feels very strongly about, and it goes towards that recruitment and retention. There's a couple reasons behind it. If you have a work base in the police department that lives and works in the city of Frederick, it's good. It definitely incorporates community policing, because the police should be part of the community and the community's part of the police. And if you want to build trust and develop those relationships, you should be able to walk by and wave to your local police officer. He should be your neighbor. He should be your friend, or she. So if we can bring more people into the city of Frederick and create some type of incentive program, that would be all the better. And now if you talk to police officers, a lot of them will say that they can't afford to live in the city of Frederick. A lot of our police officers live in Washington County. It's cheaper to live out in Washington County. So they don't mind making the drive out to Washington County because they know that they can get more house for the dollar. Some people feel safer not living in the same communities, because these are, a lot of times you're arresting very bad people. And if you have your families there, you like to go out to the different places within the city that you're living in, and you may encounter people that you've had bad interactions with through enforcement, and that's understandable as well. But if there was a way to incentivize police officers to want to move into the city, it would be all the better. And then another reason behind that, before I go into some ideas of what we talked about, is if you have officers that live in the city, many police officers now, most police officers in the city of Frederick, because of the jobs that they work, they get take-home vehicles. It's one of the perks of the job. And we're sending a lot of take-home vehicles outside the city limits, which means that's city taxpayer money that pays for gas. And I know some people have made some complaints over the years about, why are our taxpayer dollars paying for gas to go out to different parts? And the truth of the matter is there's requirements that police officers need to get back to the workstation to handle emergencies or specific jobs they have. I worked in criminal investigations. You get a homicide in the middle of the night or a robbery, you need detectives that need to get there quickly. You have to have cars available to them to get them there quickly. So just another incentive. If you have these officers living in the city, you're keeping it more local, your response times are faster in those situations, and you're also ideally going to save some money on the gas side of things, because you're keeping your cars more local. So how can we look at a residency incentive program? Well, one of them is to maybe offer a housing stipend. It is very expensive, but maybe if there's a way to come up with some monies where you can financially give somebody an incentive to have a housing stipend. I know on the private end of things, there are some apartment complexes that offer discounts to police officers because they like the idea of seeing a police officer that has a car outside of their communities. But I'm talking more what the city can do maybe to incentivize it. And then also look for some other housing incentive partnerships. So there are some private lenders out there. There's already different benefits for different people that may be veterans and such. So if there's a private entity out there that maybe a mortgage company that wants to offer some incentives that can work with the city to get some people some better deals to where they can live in the city, then that would be all the better to bring some police officers locally. All right, so that's personnel. If we want to move to community engagement. So this is community policing 2.0 under Roger Wilson. So we have to have community engagement. So one of the first things that I told them, and I actually mentioned this in that article that I wrote for the Police Chiefs magazine, is I made the comment that I view all of our police officers as ambassadors of the city. And I told Roger, I think all city employees should be ambassadors for the city. They should be approachable. They should approach people that they come in contact with. But the truth of the matter is the police are the most visible. They're out there in uniforms. They wear a big shiny badge. Everybody knows a police officer when they see them, and they are constantly 24/7 out on the beat, working the job. So they're the most visible city employees that you're going to see. So an ambassador philosophy that I think can be incorporated in the city would be to really embrace the concept of you're not just a police officer or just any city employee, but we're specifically talking about police. You're not just a police officer, you're an ambassador for the city. So that comes with, a lot of responsibilities. So part of that in the community policing world is when you're out there and you're walking on the beat, you're engaging people proactively. You're not just waiting for people to come up to you when there's an issue. You're proactively engaging individuals that you see. And go back to the idea behind recruiting and retention. One of the things that I had said in a supervisor in service with this ambassador idea is carry recruitment cards with you. So what I would like to see is police officers that have these cards with them. So when they do come across people that they think could be potentially good candidates, you can hand them out different materials to say, hey, this is what we offer here in the city. Have you ever thought about doing this? But more importantly, it's about being the face of the city. And police officers really do share a large portion of that role because of their visibility. So an ambassador philosophy would be something very easy within the first 100 days to implement and really encourage employees to be more visible, active, proactive in approaching people and really discussing what it is we do. And the most important thing for police officers, especially in today's environment, is to humanize yourself to people, because too often police officers are just looked at as a badge or a gun or the job that they do when they're human beings just like everybody else. But the community is not going to know that unless we open ourselves up and put ourselves out there personally. And there's always been this guard that police officers have had to put around themselves for a protection. But in the city, there really can be ways to lessen that and really make ourselves human, just like everybody else. And that's how we can do that through that ambassador philosophy. Behavioral health outreach. This is really a big one under community engagement. When I was in the police department, for a few years, we were actively engaged in what was called a behavioral health collaborative. And what it was different representatives from the way station, the hospital, mental health association, the police department. We had all kinds of different people in the rooms that were dealing day to day with the different behavioral health issues that were going on in the community. And they would meet as needed. A lot of times it started out where they were meeting once a month, and Chief Dine was actively involved in that, and he would have his commanders attend as well. And we had some really good discussions collaboratively as a group of, what things are we seeing and how can we work together to improve upon the services that we're providing. And that sort of went away. It went to like 90-day meetings, and then it completely disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. I think it's very important, and it's something that could easily be reinstituted within the first 100 days of getting this behavioral health collaborative back together, putting people at the table to discuss these. And we would discuss specific cases that we would see too, because a lot of times they cross over. It's not just a police issue or a hospital issue or a way station issue or a mental health issue. It usually involves all the different partners. So that's something that I think could work well and should be brought back together. And then we also want to strengthen the behavioral health outreach partnerships and efforts. There's a lot of different groups within the city. They're all working along the same lines, both governmental agencies and nonprofits. And we don't always combine those efforts, like I said, with the collaborative, but then we also need to, from the police department, be more engaged in those efforts. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that I was able to do in 2013 on our own, Frederick is a nonprofit in Frederick, and they deal with people with behavioral health issues, people who are dealing with substance abuse issues, they have mental health challenges. And what we would do is we would stop by from time to time when there'd be a problem, and we might even have to pull somebody out of there, take them to the hospital, or sometimes even in handcuffs. And that was really distancing us, and it wasn't building a strong relationship. It was creating more fear among that community. So one of the things that I did was I just went to talk to them at a weekly meeting in 2013, and they invited me to speak for a little bit. And this is no joke. I walked in the door the very first time, 5 people ran out the back of the room because they saw me in a uniform. They thought, oh no, the police are here and they're already dealing with different things, and they run out the back of the building. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what did I just walk into? But I stuck around and I answered the questions of the people that were there, and they had some strong complaints about the way that police officers were handling their business. And I took the time to just talk to them, and I said, I'll make you a deal. I'll come back next week to your meeting too, and I'll talk to you again. And I did. And then I joined their board of directors. And when I was on their board of directors, all of a sudden the relationship started changing because they saw this regular police officer that was there. And I thought that was great. People would say, oh, you're different than the other police officers. And then it hit me that, well, why is that the case? Why does that have to be the exception? So I started, and I was fortunate enough to have a command position where I had officers that worked for me in an outreach capacity that I could start deploying officers to make regular stops and visits, just stay in there, talk to people, introduce themselves, and then get to know them. So when you see them on the street, it's not a fear, it's a respect, a mutual respect. We see each other, we talk about families, we talk about improvements that are going on in our lives, and it really made a huge difference. So those are the type of behavioral health outreach partnerships that we can make and it goes again towards humanizing the police officers as part of that community policing strategy, where you can't be successful in a police department by yourself, and a community can't be successful without their police. The community is the police is the community, and you have to work together and form these partnerships, but more importantly, a trust, because it doesn't work unless there's trust there. And then the crisis intervention team model in the police department, Frederick Police Department probably receives more training in behavioral health than any agency that I've seen across the state. And the police department has never adopted the formal crisis intervention team model. There's several counties in the state of Maryland that use it. Montgomery County has a very good crisis intervention team model. Howard County does. Some other counties do as well. We've always just gone off of, well, we do all this training and we're already working with different agencies. So if we get a call out for a person who's in some type of mental health crisis, we'll have an outreach worker that will come out there and meet the police officer. So it sort of is like a crisis intervention team model without calling it that. And the police department's been working under that model for years, and that's great. But I would like to see the police department, I advocated it before, I wasn't in a position to change it, but I would like to see a formalized crisis intervention team model. And I think Frederick could really be the model for the rest of the state once we implement it. And the idea behind it is, let's get our officers trained in that team collaborative approach, where we already know going into a situation that the person's going to feel at least safe, because it's not just a police officer in a uniform responding. They have somebody else that maybe this person has already dealt with through one of our local agencies we're partnering with. And when they get there, we can diffuse the situation right away. Now, we don't always have that luxury. Any police officer will tell you, it goes back to what I said, the police are the most visible. We're working 24/7. We're going to be the first responders. We're more likely than not to be the first one there on the scene. So we have to make sure that our officers are as well trained as possible in how to de-escalate. Because when you hear about these police involved shootings across the country, I've done a lot of research and study on it. Many of them involve people who are in mental health crisis, and in situations, sometimes it's avoidable, sometimes it's unavoidable. But if we can avoid it, if we can de-escalate a situation because of the way that we're trained and the way that we handle that situation, then why wouldn't we do that? So I think it's imperative that we really look into that crisis intervention team model and ways we can improve our training in this area. But I think outside of that, it just starts with more of that community policing model of having police officers engage with people that are dealing with these struggles every single day and humanize the badge and themselves to people, because that's really what's going to change the trust and the attitudes behind that. And then community policing enhancement, there's a ton of programs. The police department does a great job with their different programs. I've commanded divisions that have covered all of these. The very first one on there is near and dear to my heart. I was assigned to our training academy for 4 years, 3 as a corporal, 1 as a sergeant, and I taught 8 sessions of the Citizen Police Academy. And for those who aren't familiar, the Citizen Police Academy is just like a regular police academy. The only difference is we have members of the community, usually 20, 25 members of the community that come 1 day a week. It's usually 3 hours in the evening. And we cover all the different topics we cover in a regular police academy, but it's a way to educate the public on what we do. And then we even get interactive, and we have the community members that are in the class. By the end, we run them through scenarios that we run our police trainees through in the police environment, in the academy environment. And it really gives them an idea of, hands-on how the police are doing their business. And we can answer all those questions that people have. Well, why did the police do this? And why did they do that? And I wish this would happen instead of this. It really opens up the door to have those conversations. And I know the police department has maintained that, but if we could make sure that that program stays and expands, I think it's so important. And one of the other things I had told Roger when we were discussing, this whole community policing thing, it comes down to transparency. I think the police department does a good job at transparency. I think the city on a whole could do a better job of transparency, in my opinion. And I think where you're going to build trust on the police side is through transparency. And we're going to talk about that in the next section when we go to the next slide. But I think informing the community, it goes back to what I said right from my introduction: education, outreach, prevention before you get to any enforcement. And the outreach and the education is the transparency piece, is really developing those relationships before there's any issues. There's always going to be something that pops up. Frederick is not immune to any of these national issues that you see. The Frederick Police Department will have officer-involved shootings. We have had officer-involved shootings over the years. That's the danger of doing the type of work that they do. But the reality is, if you can deal with your community before something bad happens in a manner where you build that trust and respect, when that bad time happens, when that crisis comes, and it will, there will be a built-in level of trust, if not, at the very least, some type of understanding of where the police are coming from the beginning. But it doesn't stop there. You need to have the transparency piece. And so I have some ideas that I'm going to talk about with that as well. Some of the other things, the POW program is Police Activities League. That's working with our children. Same thing with the GREAT training, that's gang resistance education and training. Those are programs that are designed specifically for our youth. And the GREAT training program is similar to the old DARE program that older people may be familiar with. That was really big in like the 90s and 2000s. It morphed into this GREAT training. And we used to do like DARE training for high school students. The GREAT training was upper middle school students. Now it's all the way down to 4th grade students. So we're teaching every single student in the city of Frederick, when they're in the 4th grade, this gang resistance education and training. And to a lot of people, that's horrifying that we have to teach 4th graders about all these things. But that's the world that we're living in now. There's a lot of dangers out there. And if we can get our officers engaged with children at a younger age and build that trust from a young age, then we'll be a lot more successful as they get older. Because youth, just like anything else that they're learning, whether it be from their parents, their teachers, same thing from police officers. If you want to build those relationships, it comes from a young age, and we really need to do a better job there. The SRO program, that's School Resource Officer program. I know there's been some news articles recently about whether there's a need for school resource officers. I'm telling you, as somebody who worked as a school resource officer at the time when Columbine happened out in Colorado, and then as a commander who used to command the division that had the program, it's imperative to have police officers in school engaging with our children. And it's not to engage with our children because we need to enforce them or arrest them if they do something wrong, or, be the strong arm for the educators. It's the opposite. It's the education, it's the outreach, it's the prevention, it's the building the trust, the community policing side of things, so that our kids know that they can go to a police officer when they need help with something and they're not afraid of them. We have auxiliary police officers in the city of Frederick. They do a remarkable job. That's a great program. They're volunteers. They run a lot of different community events, very important. There's also a chaplain program, which that helps our officers immensely. They do a lot of death notifications with our police officers when we have to do that. They run a lot of different special events where they do invocations, and that's very nice. But they're also there for our officers. It goes back to that mental health piece from the officer side. And it's nice knowing that you have chaplains in your program, that if a police officer is going through a rough time too, there's a resource, an extra resource there that they can talk to. And the Youth Police Academy, Michelle Bowman used to do a wonderful job with that program. We would bring kids in every summer, and almost like the Citizen Police Academy, but for kids, and run them through different scenarios, and they really enjoy it. But it's another way to engage with our youth. Now, when I talk about program enhancement, I'm listing ones that we've done in the past. One of the things we can do in the first 100 days is let's evaluate these programs and see, are there ways to enhance those? Are there some things that we can maybe downsize, or there's some additional programs maybe that we're not even aware of yet? Let's do a full evaluation. And then what that also helps us with is that staff study of being able to understand what are our needs as far as personnel, because a lot of these are labor intensive, and you're pulling police officers from different areas to be able to run these programs. So you want to make sure that you have a good staffing plan to be able to do these programs. Michelle, next slide. All right, and then the last area that I want to talk about, technology and facilities. So one of the things that I'm really big on, that I talk with Roger about, is using technology as a force multiplier. There's only so many police officers out there. We've talked about staffing and moving people around, but what are some ways that we can use technology today to really improve what we're doing? One of the big things that we started several years ago, when Tom Ledwell was still here, he was our chief of police. He had worked his whole career, and he actually got hired from the inside. He's now at Westminster Police. He's their chief. And he brought to us a three-pillared approach of policing. And his number one pillar was data-driven policing. And he was very analytical. And one of the things that we did was we incorporated these data-driven tools using technology and different programs to find out where crime was happening or most likely to happen, and then deploying our resources to those areas ahead of time. And it used a lot of math and algorithms. And a lot of times police officers were skeptical because, okay, well, we're mapping all this stuff out, and there's a standard deviation that says that this crime's going to happen here. And we were kind of skeptical. And then we started seeing results. And it was amazing to use the technology that we had and mapping out where all these different incidents were happening and putting our officers in the best place. It's not just good because it does effectively and efficiently use your staff, but from an equity standpoint, when we talk about how we police our community, I can tell you in the 90s, we had housing communities all over the city of Frederick, and there weren't maps of telling us where you should police or anything. Our police officers were in high drug areas. We were in housing community areas, not exclusively, but tremendously amount of time we were spending in these areas, and we were ignoring all the other areas of the city based on thoughts and beliefs that, well, this is obviously where all the crime's happening, without using any type of data, technology, analysis to really understand that. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of crime and everything else happening there, but we were creating a lot of it too, as well, by focusing all our efforts in certain areas. So we got smarter as the years went by, and we were able to use these data-driven technologies to put our officers in the best positions at the best times. And it really does work. And I'd like to see that expanded. Automated enforcement. If you've been through the city of Frederick, you know they have speed cameras, they have red light cameras. Different people have different philosophies about the big brother approach and automated enforcement. But the truth of the matter is, if the program's run right, and I used to run the program, and we would pull the data, and the data would tell us where accidents are happening. That's where you need to have red light cameras. We're pulling traffic statistics to find out where the most intersection accidents are happening. Let's put some red light cameras in here. And then we could evaluate it after a certain time period and see that, oh, wow, we've actually reduced accidents at these intersections. Sometimes I was seeing 60, 70% reductions in accidents by using automated enforcement, instead of sitting a police officer in a car on a corner, just waiting and watching people stop or not stop at stop signs or red lights. Same thing with speed cameras. Now, one of the interesting things that Roger and I both agree on is what can we do with technology from a standpoint of either CCTV or private cameras. One program that the city of Frederick did have, and I think they sort of got lost, it wasn't advertised as much, is there was an ability for city residents to register their private cameras. At one point in the city, our former commander, Lieutenant Dennis Dudley, used to run this program. And if you had, like nowadays, it would be great. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know if they're still maintaining this database, but with all the Ring cameras and the Nest cameras, all these different cameras that people have on their homes, give people the option. Obviously, we're not forcing anybody to do anything they don't want to. Give people the option to register their cameras, so that way, if some type of crime has happened in a certain area, police would have a database of people who have private cameras where they could look up that database and say, okay, on this block, we have 5 people that registered their private cameras. As part of our investigation, we can now go to these people, pull up their cameras, and maybe we can get some evidence to help our police officers solve these crimes. From the closed caption TV, I look at that not just as a crime fighting strategy or a force multiplier as I use it for technology, but more as a way for the city. I think it's really good marketing and really highlighting Frederick, is to put cameras. You see a lot of boardwalk cameras in like ocean towns. You see block cameras in places like big cities like New Orleans and Baltimore and everywhere else, where you can put these cameras up on corners, that you put it up on the square corner or different locations. And instead of using it as just a surveillance tool as we're watching you, it's a way for any citizen that could go onto the City of Frederick website, for instance, and be able to watch live what's going on in the city of Frederick. What a great tourism tool to have folks be able to see what's going on in downtown Frederick or some part of Route 40, what's going on in the Golden Mile. We can put some cameras up and use it as a tourism model. But then also, if you needed it as well, you'd actually have some live feed and possibly recorded video where you can use that also as a way to use technology as a force multiplier instead of having police officers staked out in certain areas. Body worn camera program. Everybody's familiar. That's the hot topic. Body worn cameras really got a big push in 2015. The city of Frederick, there was just recently an article in the Frederick News Post. I think the Frederick Police Department does the body worn camera program better than any other agency, obviously here in Frederick County, but I would even put that across the region. But there's definitely things that can be evaluated to improve what they're doing as far as expanding efforts. There's a big cost behind it. I mean, that's always going to be there, but there's different strategies that can be evaluated easily to see ways we can do it. And then one of the other things that I really like to see, and this is the transparency piece that I'm pushing, is I think the not just the city, but the police department specifically needs to get back to a PIO position or a unit where they are dealing with all the public information piece. And the reason why you specifically have to have one in the police department is because the 24/7 nature of the business that police do. And if there's something that's going to happen in the city that involves the mayor, it's typically going to be a police matter that happens in the middle of the night, and you're going to need somebody on top of that right from the beginning. And as that can be incorporated in the body worn camera program, I've seen a lot of agencies out there that get their video out quickly to the public. It's the transparency piece, because if you have a major incident that happens, the first thing people want to know is there video involved? Because there's going to be citizens that have videotaped, and they know that police officers have body worn camera video, but there's some agencies that are very slow to get it out. And you could really increase trust through transparency by having a public information unit that could get out in front of it, put out video in a timely fashion. And I've seen videos that agencies do where they actually put together a very nice uh, piece of video where a person gives a little bit of background on the incident, and then they incorporate the body worn camera video or a dash cam video into the production that they've done, so they can show people the full picture of what happened. And if you have a unit specifically dedicated to putting out public information, this is a great way to increase transparency and really build trust, so people don't wonder what's going on with police in their video and why hasn't it been released. And then the last part on there is, well, I think that one got moved around. We had already talked about training, entry level, in-service personnel development. So.
Sorry about that. I think the last one was about the headquarters.
Yeah, so one of the things that's been talked about, as everybody knows, I said I've been in the police department for a long time. Our police headquarters building is attached to the Frederick County Courthouse. It's been there for decades, and the police department outgrew that space years and years ago. And there's been a need for a permanent police headquarters building for at least 20 years. There's the law enforcement complex that houses the sheriff's office and the state police. The city of Frederick was actually to be involved in that. It was going to be all three agencies, and the city backed out when Mayor Grimes was the mayor, backed out at the last minute. And it turned out to be the best decision ever, because that building ended up being outgrown within a couple of years. And if the city was in there as well, it would be completely obsolete right now. But the problem is, all these years later, we still don't have a permanent headquarters building where the facilities are designed to house a fully functioning police department. So what has happened is the police are located in different substations, if you will. That's really different parking decks mostly that the police department owns, and they've had to divide space up, and it's not the best utilization of space or manpower or money. But the fact of the matter is, it does cost a lot of money, and there's been a lot of studies and a lot of money already spent on this police headquarters idea, but there hasn't been any movement because there's been some disagreement about locations, costs, and such. So one of the things that I suggested to Roger, and I'll let Roger address this specifically, is it doesn't matter what the decision is at this point. It just, there needs to be a decision made. There needs to be more decisiveness. And I think that's what Roger is going to bring to the table, is the transparency piece. He'll be open and honest about it, and he'll tell you up front, this is what we should do, and make a decision one way or another. So with that, I'm done with my piece. And Roger, if you wanted to add anything before we take questions.
You bet, Jason. Thank you for that thorough presentation of what we would like to see in public safety in my administration. I think that we're demonstrating leadership, and I really do like what Jason said about making decisions and being transparent. You know, just for example, the chief of police, we've been without a chief of police for about a year now, and probably more than a year. And that is just unacceptable. I think that where we need to be, and what I would like to hire, if I were to hire a new chief of police, is that they value community, they value people, and they value innovation. And that's what I'm going to be looking for in this next chief. And I think it would be good for us to move forward on our police headquarters. My first 100 days is totally focused on putting together a CIP plan and moving forward on the police headquarters. And then the last thing that I wanted to address was we need to get back to the basics of policing as well. We need to show and demonstrate that we are enforcing those small things, things that we see around us, like just skateboarding. You know, I've heard concerns about that. different things like loitering and we need to get back to those basics in law enforcement. And I'm also encouraged by what was presented today by Jason on Community Policing 2.0. We need to reach for that vision. And I think the community will be better off having that Community Policing 2.0. I think the community is ready for it, and we're ready to lead on it. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. Please, Michelle, unmute everyone, and let's have a conversation for the next 20 minutes, okay?
Well, everybody can unmute themselves. I have a question here in the chat from Janine. Janine, if you unmute yourself, would you like to read your question?
Sure. Thank you, Jason, for the excellent presentation. It was very thorough, and it also reminded me a lot of education, which I am involved in. And I was just asking about ways that community organizations can partner with the community outreach, because I think that's the biggest hurdle when we talk about, all that's going on in our community right now and the fear that some people have. I mean, I think of police officers for safety. If I have an emergency, I'm calling a police officer. So it's disappointing to see the fear that is arising as a result of different interactions and things that have gone on in the news, but also understandable, right? I'm just wondering how we can partner some of our community organizations. We have a lot in Frederick with some of the community outreach that the police department is engaging in. I know it exists.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And that's the great thing about the Frederick Police Department is they're so responsive. So if there's an organization or a business even that wants to have a police officer come and talk to their group about how they can interact better or talk about ways to work together, the police department will be glad to send somebody out and have that conversation because it's important. I push public-private partnerships all the time from the police side of things because the police can't do it themselves and the community can't do it themselves. So we have to work together and we have to find ways of partnering. So there's different jobs that you have in your position that maybe a police officer or some type of partnership would be beneficial to you. So I would always recommend to anybody, no matter where you work, if you think there's something that will be beneficial to your organization, mutually beneficial too for the police department, then don't hesitate to call and ask to see if somebody can come and speak. And then the police department does that as well. We have roll calls between every shift. So there's different shifts that police officers work, that supervisors and the officers meet for about 10 to 15 minutes before each shift, and they go over the daily assignments. And there's a lot of times where if there's somebody in the community, we can only do it obviously briefly because the roll calls are brief, but we've brought people in from different parts of the community just to give a presentation at a roll call even, and just to introduce themselves and say, hey, this is who I work for, this is what we do. These are some things that I think we could work together on. And I just wanted to offer that up, and we'll have people come in and even do that at a roll call setting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also have a question from Philip. Philip, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, my question is concerning, and Roger knows my sort of heckling game that I've played relative to trying to get some things going. And the particular one that I'm interested in, having been in IT for over 40 years, is you got a statement about data-driven and stuff like that. But for the most part, the data-driven I think is beyond just the, if you want to call it the crime recording and reporting and that kind of stuff, even though there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done there relative to the citizenry. So I guess I was looking at things like basically just a citizens portal for the purposes of dealing with complaints of almost any and all kinds. So as an example, if you've got an issue with a police officer or something of that nature, that it seems you should be able to file that complaint and do it in such a manner so as you can track progress or anything that may or may not be being done with it. And that the different departments across the city can use for a statistical understanding of how they're doing, performance-wise relative to the citizenry. So there's things like, I guess I would say, I mean, and again, I don't know exactly what information you have. I know you're working independently with all kinds of different departments, like the mental health out of the county, or the food services, or the homeless and this other stuff. But I don't see anything that really relates to the information management of what's going on in our city that would also be helpful for the police to be able to use relative to that data-driven game. So what I'm saying is, yeah, you got all kinds of good stuff, but you're missing a basic infrastructure chunk, which appears to be the information in and itself, the capture, the dissemination, the analysis of it. You seem to be doing it mostly by hook and by crook.
Yeah, so yeah, those are good points. And I think the technology exists. You can use data for anything. My recommendation would be to Roger. And I think the police department, frankly, does data-driven better than any other aspect of the city government. I think the entire city government should be data-driven, not just the police department. We're here today talking about public safety from the police side of things. But I think, to your point, Philip, I think data-driven needs to be all aspects of our city government. And I think that's part of that transparency piece. And I agree with you. And we have an internal affairs department inside the Frederick Police Department that they investigate complaints to the specific matter that you had mentioned. And they can easily do that. And I'm sure they track their complaints and everything as far as, using the data to respond back to the individual, or where they can track their complaints. I don't think they've specifically done that, but they certainly have, ways that they communicate with people that make specific complaints. They keep data of every complaint that they get. They put out statistics. They're responsible. Actually, they're required to put out the data as far as complaints, how many complaints, the resolution of those complaints. So they track all of that stuff. It might not be as transparent to the public of how that's handled, just on that specific example. But I agree with you. I think there's different ways, a lot of different ways that the city as a whole can use data. And I would recommend that Roger really explore that through all the departments of the city, is use data as a tool. And it is a force multiplier in the police department, but what better way to get efficiency than to use data to find that out?
Yeah,
I agree with what you're saying.
Phil, this
I
is
think-
Roger. I just want to remind you that is one of my platform items, to
Yep.
reconnect, the city with the community. I think that's important. Data is definitely something that I value in making decisions. Right now, that's not in place, and it really kind of cripples us on the ability to make good decisions and provide good services. So I'm definitely going to be pushing that. We're going to have a separate discussion around being data driven in the city. So would encourage you to wait for that one and register for that Zoom
Okay,
call. Okay.
Sounds good, and appreciate that, Roger. You and I have been talking about that kind of stuff for quite a while. Another one that didn't seem to show up on the presentation today was I don't know if it's the past or planned or where it stands, but that's the Police Chiefs Forum, for which I was a member of for many years. I don't know where that is. I don't know whether it's going anywhere or what the plan is for it. Is that the kind of thing, Roger, that you see as being useful also?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the tools that we can keep in place or bring back. Again, we've been without a chief for over a year now. So I would imagine that'll be one of the questions that I will be asking of the candidates, the nominees for the next chief. But definitely that's another tool that we can use to re-engage the community.
Yeah, I just want to put a plug in for that. I think it was very useful. It was very informative. I think the police department did an excellent job in showing, how their performance is working and where they're working to try to improve and all kinds of other good stuff. So I would advise very much that be certainly reinstated and/or something that provides the similar services, like some form of police portal, citizens information deal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you're right, Phil. And educating the community is should be a value, something that we should do on a regular basis.
Okay, we have another question from Kristen. Kristen, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Good morning. So my question is about the SRO program. I know there's been a lot of counties that are on the move to remove SROs from the schools. I just wanted to know like how you felt about that, like, and what would be the impact on our students and families if the SROs were removed?
Well,
Thank you.
Kristen, I'll take that, Jason, and then you can follow. I'll clearly state my position on SROs in our schools. I am an advocate for keeping our SROs in our schools. I think they bring tremendous value in making sure that that relationships at a young age are formed, and removing SROs from the school system is a non-starter for me. I know that the county, the sheriff's office has advocated for making sure that SROs are kept in the school system. And I know the Frederick Police Department has also advocated for keeping our SROs in the school system. So it's a non-starter of even thinking about removing the SROs from the school system. Okay. Thank you, Kristen. Jason, you have any more on that?
Yeah, I touched on it very briefly during the presentation, but I can tell you it's not even about the obvious response time in case you have a critical incident. I mean, obviously school shootings has been a major concern for the last 20 plus years now, and they can happen anywhere. Rule that part out. Take safety aside just from that. I think going to Roger's point, I think health-wise, mental health-wise for our children, I think it is so important to build that trust with our children from a young age, because just like I mentioned before, whether it's the way parents raise their kids or teachers teach their kids, police officers, everybody who has a role in a child's life needs to have a positive impact on them. If you remove those police officers from the school, it will just further divide and create that mistrust. And people should not be afraid of that uniform. And that's especially kids, but adults should not be afraid of a police officer in uniform. And I'll just lastly say, when I use that example, when I walked into that center where there were folks there that had mental health and substance abuse challenges, and 5 people ran out of the room, they were running out of the room because they saw a uniform, and that triggered them from a past experience they had. I don't want people to be triggered by a uniform because of negative experiences they have. I want them to see a uniform as a member of the public that is part of them that they can trust. And the way to do that is to surround people more with the uniform, not less. And there's been a big push of people saying that they don't want people wearing, or police officers wearing uniforms in certain locations. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And when I would go to these different events or different places, sometimes people would ask me, oh, well, can you just come in civilian clothes and not wear your uniform? And I wouldn't do it. I will be glad to come and talk to you, but I'm going to do it in uniform, because if I keep coming back and you keep seeing me in this uniform and you get to develop a relationship with me, then that uniform will disappear by itself, because we'll have a mutual respect. And that's what we need to build towards. And that's really community policing, is the police have to be part of the community, and the community has to be part of the police.
Right, Jason. I think you're right. You know, you hit on community, and it's nothing like seeing a police officer having lunch with a student and establishing a relationship and friendship. And that may inspire that student to grow up and become a police officer. Who knows? Who knows what happens during that that relationship, that positive feeling that they get. So I think that's good. I think it's good to have an experience with a police officer not when it's something bad that's happening, but when something's positive is happening too. So it's very important that we keep our SRO program in place. So thanks, Kristen, for the question.
Thank you for your time.
Are there any other questions? There's no other questions in the chat, but if anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself and
Michelle, I think you did have another question. Brent Kramer?
yeah, that was it looks like it was a message he had to go. So he left a message thanking us and you guys for your discussion.
Okay, yeah. It looks like he mentioned that from a business perspective that good public safety is encouraged. So I agree with him.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question?
Yeah, this is Denise Sparks.
Hello, Denise, go ahead.
I would like to know if Roger, if elected, plans on continuing with the police, in conjunction with the police department, the National Night Out.
Yes, yes. I think, thanks, Denise, for the question. I think that's, again, another opportunity to stay engaged with the community and educating the community on what's happening with our law enforcement and public safety. And also, I think it's an opportunity for relationship building and trust building. So yes, I definitely want to keep that program in place and participate.
Anybody else have a question? Thank you, Denise.
Ronnie, did you have a question?
No, you've covered it all. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, that is actually exactly on time, which is incredible. I love when things happen on time. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you guys for coming today and especially for hanging in there with me while I deal with these technical problems. This is our first of these events, so I'm sure it will only get better as we go along. So after today, I really encourage you, if you haven't yet, to go visit our website at rogerforfrederick.com, where you can keep up with us by subscribing to the newsletter. You can look at the news and events, and there you'll see updates about more Zoom and greets just like this one that will be coming up down the line. You can also read more about Roger's position on some of the issues. You can donate to the campaign, which is always appreciated. You can request a lawn sign for your yard, volunteer, which we are accepting a lot of volunteers now for, we're not doing as much as we will be doing in the next few months, but gathering people and asking what they would like to do for the campaign. There's things that people can do just online because we, of course, know the limitations of the COVID-19 pandemic. And hopefully later when things improve, more things in person outside and the social distancing and masks. So please visit the website and also please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram at Roger for Mayor. And if you have any other questions that come up after we close today or any comments that you'd like to send, you can contact Roger at Frederick@gmail.com. So that's it for today. I thank you guys again. And I think this was wonderful. It was great to see you guys. It was great to hear your presentation, Jason, and great to hear all of your questions. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.